You're listening to the Decentered Media podcast with me, Rob Watson. Conversations about community media. Visit decentered.co.uk or follow on Instagram and Twitter at Decentered Media. Good evening, Rob Watson here for Decentered Media, and it is Tuesday the 12th of March. No, it's Wednesday the 12th of March. And I thought I'd do another kind of quick podcast. Little and often is perhaps the best way of doing these things and sharing thoughts about things with you. And what I want to talk about today is something I've written a blog about, and it was based on some experience at the weekend, which I talked about briefly in the last podcast. Excuse me. And it's kind of something that it really is a bit of kind of unfinished business with me in terms of work I've done around community radio over the years, and how and what is kind of I understand about the benefit and the purpose of community radio, and kind of how we maybe should think about what we gain and what the social benefit is of working in an environment that is non-professional, supported by volunteers, and driven by a very different set of motivations than professionalised media is. This is all very well and extensively documented in the community media academic story behind all of this, so I'm not really repeating anything new, but it's kind of one of the things I think you have to remind yourself every now and again, is that to understand community radio, to understand community media, it's no good looking at it from the sidelines. It's no good observing from the outside. What you've really got to do is get inside, experience it, do it, roll your sleeves up, be part of it, and then you understand, or you start to understand, what it is, the dynamic process that people go through in contributing to community-based focused storytelling, to self-representation, and to the way that people are empowered, inspired to engage in meaningful communications, as opposed to the kind of largely meaningless forms of media that we are often dominated by. And I grew up in a world where it was saturated with media, and constantly having to figure out strategies and ways of understanding, on what basis are we using media, how is it a lived kind of practice and experience. And anybody who is dismissive of the idea of lived experience kind of needs to get out more and put themselves in other people's shoes for a moment. I'm not saying that it should dominate their experience or it should dominate their thinking entirely, but as a balance, 50-50, if you like, it really does make a big difference. I mean, you might want to call it user-generated experience, kind of user modelling. There's all sorts of technical phrases that you can think about this on the basis of, but getting in and putting yourself in the situation of somebody who is wanting to contribute towards their community, to help support and to nurture a sense of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of engagement, and to add something which makes a contribution to the well-being and the life of a community, rather than merely just driving by and looking at things from afar. But it's people talking about their own lives in their own way, for their own reasons, using the tools that they have. And of course, one of the things that has really changed over the last 20 years, since I've started doing this 30 years ago, is that the technology's changed, and that we're in a position where the ability to use smartphones, the ability to be online, the ability to engage through social networks has all transformed how and when we're using media. And the vast majority of us, in some form or other, are using media, whether it's constantly to communicate with our families, friends, our network, whether it's sending an email, whether it's sending a WhatsApp message, whether it's standing in a supermarket, overhearing somebody's conversation on a video call, and they haven't got headphones in, and you can hear them talking to somebody around the world about what kind of margarine they're going to buy. It's we live in a mediated, a world of mediation, and a world where people are engaged in media practices, but there's kind of a disconnection between the mainstream industrial forms of media, the infrastructure-based media, and the dispersed, decentralised, community-based forms of media. So, there's that kind of polarity between the two, in which media on the one hand is produced for people, we talk about audiences, and on the other hand, it's produced by people for themselves and for their communities, and it maybe doesn't use the same kind of industrial metrics and markers of success, in terms of professionalism and in terms of product proficiency, but it is as equally important to people. And I'm not against large mass forms of media. I saw a couple of films at the weekend. I saw Dune last week, and Dune, not Dune. I'm not on the Americans. A friend of mine pronounces it Dune, and it's like, are you an American? And it's June, as in June Whitfield rather than Dune Whitfield. Anyway, the idea, that's an incredible cinematic achievement, and it takes all these skills, and it takes this creative focus, and it takes a commercial environment to set that up and bring that into play, and it's awesome. It's really great. But, if we've lost the small artisan craft production, independent producers, the networks of local filmmakers, and all you can ever do is go to see the stuff at the Megaplex and eat the Megaplex popcorn and hot dogs and see the same film told over time and time again, the same superhero movies told time and time again, selling the same kind of products with the same kind of product placements and the same kind of narratives and the same kind of resolutions. If we only ever see those things and we're expected to be grateful because there's a film in this way about people of this kind of social variety, and there's a film over here which has got this kind of, I'm waiting for the Scouse working class superhero that emerges out of the slums of Liverpool and takes over the world. It's that's my tribe that I identify, and I expect a superhero model to be based on that. We're waiting for other people to represent us in the media. Well, why aren't we representing ourselves, telling our own stories, creating our own content, and being part of the creative process of being part of a living community, rather than, if you like, an artificially defined, manufactured, simulated kind of community that you get through mass media. So it kind of really reminded me that this is unfinished business for me, because many years ago, when I helped led, in fact, on taking the student station at De Montfort University, Demon FM, from a student station to a community station with a full-time licence. I kind of probably was a bit ahead of my time, and we didn't have the infrastructure in place and the follow-up to be able to really sell the idea of what community radio stations can achieve and do, and there was a lag, because the focus, a bit like a tanker that needs to change direction, was really towards industry, kind of a stepping stone, an escalator into getting a job into the commercial or BBC forms of radio. And not surprisingly, the industrial landscape for radio in particular has changed significantly. It's changing for television. About how and in what way that you would go on to a career. Those jobs aren't there in the same way. The BBC is cutting its local radio workforce. It's moving towards digital forms of journalism, whatever this means and however problematic we might think it is. Also, that the whole kind of I used to really get annoyed when I was at community media events and somebody from the BBC or from a commercial radio station was invited to speak, and they'd say, "Oh, we love community radio because you're the talent pool. You're the nursery grounds where we can nick our the future talent." And what they never really understood and would never really accept is that the vast majority of people, if I was pushed to put a number on it, 95% of people who get involved with community radio get involved because they don't want anything to do with the BBC or with commercial radio stations. They want to serve and be part of their local community. They want to have that strong identification with place. They want that strong identification with self-determination to be able to talk about the things that they want to talk about. Whether they do that well or badly is a different issue, but they want to be able to share and engage with their networks and their friends and talk about their faiths, talk about their experience of their cultural, social, ethnic identity, talk about their class identity, whatever it is, their artist, creative drive, without it being mediated by managers far away from where they're based. And that's incredibly important. So at the weekend, we had a meeting, the first directors meeting for Saw Sound, which I've kind of volunteered, another thing I've volunteered to do. I'm working with some really good colleagues, Sam and John and Ian and Dee, as well as other volunteers who are supporting the station as well. And we wanted to very quickly set the scene, and we had a discussion after after the formal part of our meeting with some of the volunteers who came, and we captured some of their thoughts about why they are volunteering for community radio. And some of the things that they were telling us about was, it's kind of, there's an awful lot of one of the most powerful points was made was that there's an awful lot of really bad stuff happening in the UK, and people feel quite ground down. Many people are quite insecure. People don't feel as if they're being listened to or invested in. It's a general pervasive sense. We're all having to work harder. We're seeing less for it, and there's many people who have been squeezed, and the poorest people seem to be the most squeezed. And if the lack of there's general consensus about the state of public services, and local councils are going bust, and the health services facing significant problems, and all of these things compound our sense of anxiety and our sense of collective a sense of malaise. And it's like, if we're not working together well as a community internally within the radio station, that seeps through in the programming that we do, and other people feel that vibe. And our job is to relate to people, but not undermine their sense of well-being, but not to dwell gloomily on the problems, but to point them towards directions where they maybe get solutions. So the adage that's been I've used all week, because it's kind of fresh in my mind, is that marketing thing of why do people try and sell you a drill bit? They'll tell you about it's made out of tungsten and it's X number of millimeters and it does this and it hammers through brickwork and it does all of this, and you kind of sit there going, well, that's all very well and good, but what I want is a hole. Because I need a hole to put up a bookshelf so I can display my books, or I can, hang pots and pans, or I can fix a window together. I don't really need drill bits. What I need is holes. And that simple distinction we really have to remember. I think the BBC, for example, is obsessed with drill bits and the different formulation of the types of bits that you can use for a job, when it very seldom actually has an open and honest conversation with people about what they need out of their media. It's a one-way conversation that says, but we've designed these bits and we've designed these drills, and you should be appreciative that we're really smart and we come up with these bits. And you say, that's all right, I've been to IKEA and I've bought a bookcase and I don't need to fix anything to the wall anymore, so I don't need your drill bit. And that's the world we live in now. We have choices and we have opportunities, and somebody else in the marketplace will come along and provide us with a product that maybe suits our needs better, because we've been neglected by the likes of the BBC. And I think that's a phrase that we should really explore. How does our mainstream media neglect us as individuals and as communities? And I'm not saying we're a long, long way off from community media and community radio being able to fill this gap of, not communities not feeling that they're neglected in the way that we communicate and the way that we represent ourselves. So there's a whole set of complex motivations that drive people to want to volunteer for a community radio station. And I think we kind of every now and again have to remind ourselves what they are and think about it. And in the first instance, and we've, I think fairly, and having had a conversation with a couple of colleagues, it's fair to say that everybody who's come forward to volunteer for Soar Sound are in some way have had a tough time in other situations in the past and other media situations. And we've been around the block a few times and we've seen how difficult it can be to bring everybody together for a common purpose. And we're a bit, war weary and maybe a bit jaded and cynical. But at the same time, we've kind of come together to say, yeah, but you know what? This is still worth having a go at doing. It might be the last throw of the dice, but it's still worth us giving it a go because we think there is something that we can add to the collective benefit in our own small way, which if we come together, we form a sense of community for ourselves. So that sense of belonging is incredibly important. And it's that, the David Putnam in the book Bowling Alone talks about this, the bonding sense, the bonding activities are fewer and further between in Western society now. There was a point in the 1950s when people used to go around to other people's neighbours' houses and play cards, he describes, in the kind of suburban environment. And he said, that with the introduction of television, that has kind of basically disappeared and we're all privatised. We're watching our phones individually. All of our media is designated around personalised media. And that social and collective experience is deregulated, pushed back and more limited. So there's something about bringing people together for a common purpose, whether that's about representation, whether about correcting an imbalance in society, or whether it's just forming a life raft for people of a similar mindset who need that well-being, collective identity for a sense of well-being. But there's also a sense of motivation to serve the community that we're part of, or recognizing that it's very difficult to generate or promote or recognize a sense of community sometimes. And I think in the UK, it can be very difficult to have a balanced view about community without kind of resorting to cliches and stereotypes that is fundamentally coherent, consistent, and interrelational. That the danger is that and other people talk about this in some detail, and it's worth as something we may consider in the future. And I think I've written some blogs about this. Is that the whole nature of kind of multiculturalism was about holding people separately, the separate identification, and that belonging, bonding culture, is really important. But at some point, for a cohesive society, it's something Ted Cantle talks about, is that you need an intercultural model where you have communities talking with one another and across each other's communities, rather than simply speaking to your own defined community and creating those kind of echo chambers. And social media is really kind of amplifies that fragmentation of a sense of community. It doesn't allow for a sense of community to develop because it becomes quite antagonistic. So we need to think about how we use community media and community radio stations for things like inclusive communication, both internally and externally. How do we bring people together? What kind of training opportunities are we putting forward? What kind of engagement with local events? What kind of how do we foster an inclusive environment within our radio station? I mean, there's many community radio stations that do auditions and for presenters, and I it's an anathema for me. I think if somebody's willing to make a contribution, we shouldn't put judgmental expectations in front of somebody. I always say that if somebody has the opportunity to learn and grow, and to work within, I'm not saying that they shouldn't work within a kind of system and a routine that's mapped out as they learn. But, what I am against is putting barriers in front of people when they can make a really perfect, reasonable contribution without having to live up to some kind of artificially structured expectations of professionalism. And, repeat this often enough and keep repeating this. As Raymond Williams says, the way to democratise our media is to deprofessionalise it. So a lot of the routines and expectations of radio, I'd say 99% of them can probably be abandoned, and we'd all breathe a sigh of relief and say, well, why on earth did we do that for so long? It's most of it is not about engaging with people. It's a routine for selling products. It's a routine for managing a bureaucracy. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're providing a meaningful experience for people to actually engage with one another. So this kind of requires us to think about a framework of engagement. And how we structure a community radio station is very different from how you'd run a commercial or professionalised media organisation or any other kind of business or organisation, because what you've got to do is and community radio is the only form of broadcast media in the UK that the legislation states explicitly and clearly, and it is regulated by Ofcom, that you have the right to get involved with your local community radio station. And if you're not able to do that, then you are the station is failing in its key commitments. It has to be answerable and accountable to its community that it serves. What that means in practice is often quite variable, and I'm very open to the discussion about how in different circumstances you pragmatically implement that. But if you want to get involved, unless unless there's a really significant reason for safeguard and protection or whatever, then you really it's if you've got a local community radio station and you're not involved in that, and you want to be involved in that, whether it's to help out and make cups of tea, or whether it's to learn the ropes of how some more experienced people are, you've got the opportunity to do that. And putting artificial constraints demoralize people. And one of the things that is the ethos of Soar Sound is to say we'll do what we say we'll do, which is to get everybody involved to make a contribution where they can. Now, I'm not actually interested in having a radio programme, believe it or not. I'm no good at making radio programmes. I can do this. I can do podcasting. I can speak my thoughts for half an hour and merrily chat away about all sorts of subjects that I'm concerned about, but I'm not a good natural communicator with a general population. I don't think I could ever make anybody feel relaxed, or well informed. I struggle because I'm dyslexic. I struggle reading things out. I still even now get malapropisms and get my. If I'm writing things down, even now I get letters, back to front and in the wrong places in words. My spelling's terrible. So I find that, it's problematic to do that at that level. I can happily take part in a conversation about things. So I would have to seek and find my way of doing that. And other people similarly come from different expectations and have different capabilities. But there's usually a way that you can work around things. And anybody who prescribes community radio as being one way of doing things, that's an imitation of the way that the BBC does something, or that the commercial sector does something, really it has a deficit of imagination. And there's some great examples out there of community radio stations that really test the boundaries. I'm a big fan, as you probably know, of Sound Art Radio, but there's Resonance FM. There's lots of other stations, and I'd like to really be part of that conversation of looking at what's exciting and interesting, and who's breaking new ground, and who's really engaging and bringing their community sense of community alive and bringing people together, without having to be given a history lesson about what it was like in the 1980s to work on an ILR station, and this is how we did it in the days of Centre Radio or the days of whoever. It's that's the past. Let's look at how we can do this for the future. Crucially, one of the things that's changed is the need for fixed studios. And a lot of now is done from people's bedrooms, spare rooms. You can do it on a laptop sitting in a cafe. It's not beyond the realm of possibility to virtually create community radio stations now. It's great to have that hub, but it's no longer essential, and that kind of changes the way that we think about how we bring people together. So there's kind of some tips that we kind of would look towards, which are kind of a sense of a commitment to open communication, transparency. The adage that community radio is 10% radio and 90% community development is essential for people's thinking. Is that you've really got to be accountable and open and honest with the people who are getting involved, because they're volunteers. They're not employees, and they shouldn't be treated in such a way, nor should there be any single point of control. You've got to have an accountability structure, a governance structure in place. That is, I think, is there a light flashing, or is it me? I think it's me. But there's a real sense that you don't get stuck with things being managed by just one person or a very small group of people who gatekeep what everybody else should be doing. There's got to be open, unless there's a good reason for safeguard and data protection, financial management, all those kind of things, which any other community-based charity, community-based organisation has to be work at that level of accountability for and transparency for. Then it's an open democratic process that the volunteers and the supporters and the stakeholders really need to be able to understand why decisions are made and be part of the decision making process as well. So it's not seen as something which is separate from other activities. You've got to actively recruit people. There's an awful lot of people who, when you ask them and say, kind of, would you be interested in doing a radio program? They kind of look at you as if, as we say in Liverpool, as you've got a welly on your head, Wellington, on your head. And it's just really the idea that, most people, I don't think, feel empowered or inspired to produce their own radio content. So you've kind of got to go that extra mile to persuade people and make them feel confident that they're going to get the right kind of support, they'll get the right kind of training, and that it's okay to learn, and that the process of producing content for a radio station is a developmental and learning process, and you get better as you do it, and you move on. Now, if you don't move on, we'll find you something else to do, something more suited to your needs, but it's a good thing to be learning, and you are a learning community, and that other people within the internal community and the external community are helping you as a learner. You're learning how to communicate and to foster a sense of community. You're also learning how to use mixing desks and microphones and plan programs and to do shows and to connect with other people and to use systems. And it's the media literacies that come from this it's 50% media literacies and 50% social literacies, that you are learning about other people and how to engage with them. And we've been through the pandemic where you in isolation, where you don't maybe reticent about engaging with other people. It was a tough period, but we've come out of that now, and we have to engage with one another, and we have to be pushing things forward, and we also have to be there's nothing wrong with being a bit disruptive. I think a lot of the time, and a lot of the problems are that people play it safe, and that what ends up happening is that we end up in a situation where we're very good at being administrators, but we're not very good at being innovators, and we've become too safe. And actually there's many just because a play-out system is modelled on the way that Radio 2 did stuff in the early noughties doesn't mean to say that you have to. There's all sorts of ways that you can engage with this. So fundamentally, you one of the priorities is to recognise the contributions that everybody makes. And one of the great things I'm really enthusiastic about with Soar Sound is that we've said that no one person it has done more than 10% to make the station, or will do more than 10% to make the station a success. And anybody who tries to claim credit for things and keep themselves in a kind of on a pedestal, if you like, because they've got this mystique around them of having created stuff. Well, it's a team effort, and community radio is, because people aren't being paid, is really dependent on contributions from a wide range of people, and you've got to draw that in and value that by acknowledging it and recognising it. So you've got to create this kind of, inclusive environment for people to get involved. And that means taking things at people's pace of learning that is suited to them. And it also means allowing people to do more than just present radio programs. People want to build friendships. They want to develop their skills. They want a sense of personal fulfillment. And yes, a kind of sense of empowerment that comes from finding your voice, literally finding your voice, because you realize that you've got a role, a contribution to make within society. So all of these kind of factors, that we hope that will, sense that develop and contribute towards that growing sense of community, where by focusing on the kind of impact and the difference we make with our limited resources, and community radio is always has limited resources, actually in a small way, we're not changing the whole world, but we're making a contribution towards a conversation which leads on to change, and hopefully positive change. That we are part of a wider civic form of engagement and discussion. We're about promoting diversity of perspectives. There's an educational value to what we do, and there's a sense that we're contributing towards the cohesion of our community. Now, what drives people to do this is multifaceted. It's complex. People have different life stories, life experiences, different expectations, different things they have to monitor and protect other people within their families and within their social networks. And so you have to employ your social skills. Your social worker side has to come out. You're not just a content producer, a media producer. You have to know how to tell stories. You have to know when to communicate emotionally. You're not just answerable to a director of regional business affairs and management type post, but you're invested in making a difference to the lives of the people who listen, and hopefully get positive feedback about that. So it's just, I came back home today after helping out with a session at De Montfort University with Nikki Phillips, looking at community corporate communications, which is in my language is press and PR, which is a bit of an anathema for me. But what's really great is we've got the middle ground together of saying, this is not just about making something look good. It's about actually doing good. And that was a phrase that Nikki came up with when we were talking with the students, the master's students, a few weeks ago. And I think that's really, for me, that's a good distinction. It's like we use our communication not just to oil the mechanism, to make things work efficiently. We actually have to use it for a public purpose, which is to change the way that we operate and the way that society functions, and who benefits from society, and how we can reduce marginalisation, inequality, all of those things, insecurity, all of those things that kind of are anti. I'm in favour of using community media and communications for social democratic purposes, and I think it has a lot of things that it can offer, and can make an enormous contribution to that. Anyway, so it was really good to be reminded of these things, and be able to express them and talk about them. And it's something that I think we should be talking about them more often. And those people who feel that similar sort of passion, come and join me, because it would be great to do a podcast. If you want to come and have a debate or a discussion, an argument, a row, however much you want to escalate this, then give me a shout. And it's Rob Watson at decentered.co.uk, and the website is decentered.co.uk, and you can follow me on Twitter, Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky, Mastodon, at Decentered Media. No, is it just Decentered? Yeah, at Decentered. And if you want to contribute to the Patreon page, Patreon account, which is at patreon.com, https, all that stuff, patreon.com/decenteredmedia, which would allow me to go for the occasional coffee and to pay for some of the server costs and things like that, just run some of the basic things, and to keep promoting the idea of a socially focused form of community media in its broadest sense, using every possible media form that we can think of. I'm completely agnostic about any kind of media. I like radio. I kind of feel as if I've got my enthusiasm for radio is being rekindled, but there are other forms of media out there that this applies to in exactly the same way. It's about inspiring people to come and use media in a positive way to address social challenges and to add and contribute towards the greater good. There we go. Until next time, thank you very much. You've been listening to the Decentered Media podcast with me, Rob Watson. To find out more, go to decentered.co.uk or follow on Twitter and Instagram @Decentered Media.